So hello, I'm Annemarie Ross from the National Technical Institute for the Deaf. My colleague Todd Pagano had to leave, but I will be presenting. He had to support a graduate student of ours who is deaf and is presenting herself. We're very proud of her. So he's there to support her. So my talk today, as the title implies, I'll be talking about some successful deaf scientists in the past and the accommodations they use, leading into the accommodations we use to make our own students successful to become successful, hopefully successful scientists themselves. So the first one is Sir John Cornforth. He's actually won the Nobel Prize in Chemistry for his work in stereochemistry back in 1975. We actually have an autograph picture from him in our lab. We're very proud of him. He actually entered chemistry because he felt his deafness would not interfere. So in a way, he suggested that chemistry and science itself is an accommodation. And if you think about it, it makes sense because it's very visual. We have 3D modeling, hands-on experimentation. It makes sense. He could not hear lectures. Just to give you a little bit of background of his deafness, starting in high school. The accommodations he mostly used throughout his education was to rely on speech reading and writing for communication all the way through his PhD work. Another scientist who was female, she's an American biochemist, Nancy Sharples. She got her bachelor's degree in zoology from Oberlin College. What she used educationally was to rely heavily on her friends' lecture notes. She received her doctorate from Wayne State, and this was during a time where it wasn't encouraged for women to be educated, and her friends and family warned her about being over-educated as a deaf woman. The professional accommodation she used actually influences us quite significantly today. She supplemented her professional presentations with visual material, just like I'm doing in this PowerPoint with a picture of her. And during her presentation, she would have moderators relay any questions from the audience to her. But universal accommodation, because of her visual presentations and her visual supplementation, led into the poster presentations we do today. And she actually did this at ACS meetings, so we have her to thank for that. Lastly, we have, well, not lastly, one more after this, Dr. Pasteuraz. She was a major in microbiology, and she wanted to go to medical school. That was her dream. She applied to many medical schools, and she was turned down at first, but that didn't stop her in terms of continuing her education. She went on to receive a master's and PhD in biochemistry. Her educational accommodation was to sit in front of the class to lip read, and she also borrowed notes from her friends. After over 14 years of continuously applying to medical schools and being turned down, she was finally accepted to the Louisville School of Medicine, and she became the first deaf woman in America to have both an MD and PhD. And she actually developed her own accommodation by using an oscilloscope attached to a stethoscope, and that was part of the concern for the medical schools in terms of accepting her. They weren't sure if she could use a stethoscope, so she came up with one on her own. A very much older scientist, Dr. Eckert, he discovered the element tantalum in early 1800s. And you probably know the famous scientist Lavoisier. After his publication, Dr. Eckert published the modern names of elements into the Swedish language. They're both Swedish scientists. By 1796, big difference, he became Sweden's foremost chemist. And he actually, an interesting fact, creatively accommodated in terms of writing what he wanted to say on paper and in invisible ink given to the King of Sweden, who had to warm up the paper to read it. So I thought that was an interesting fact. We don't have much information on how he went through school and accommodated himself other than that. So today's accommodation, many of you are probably familiar with them. We've always used interpreters, back then and now. That's still a very important use. Now, thanks to technology, the biggest difference starts with CART. If you're not familiar with that, that stands for Communication Access Real-Time Translation. And it's just like what you see in the course where a person's sitting there using a stenograph to transcribe everything that's being said. We also have video relay systems, which is when we make a phone call on the TV, we have an interpreter we can visually see who interprets everything from the other person saying it. Also, cell phones, that might be something that we may overlook, but we use that because it's so portable and we have it with us all the time. We can text to a hearing person, or we can actually just write down what we want to say, but using the keyboard. I see that used every day by my students, myself. It's very common. So hopefully you're familiar with kinetics. We're going to use this to talk about student success and how we can accommodate them. So attitude is very important. We can all agree on that. And education, but accessible education, can lead to student success. And those two pieces are needed to overcome the activation barrier so we can produce the successful deaf scientists for today's time. To give you a little background of the program I teach in terms of the curriculum we provide them so they can be successful. We're at RIT, which is the Rochester Institute of Technology in Rochester, New York, over 17,000 students, offering from associate to doctorate level degrees. And one of the 9 colleges is the National Technical Institute for the Deaf. In that college, I teach in a laboratory science technology program, and we offer associate level degrees where they can go right into the workforce if they wanted to, but we also offer them a +2 option, meaning they can transfer to receive their bachelor's degree in one of the other colleges of RIT if they continue. We are recognized by the ACS Chemical Technology Program Approval Service. That was about a couple years ago. So because we have such a large deaf community, it's very easy to accommodate our students in a classroom. So just a little bit about our students. We believe they're very knowledgeable in applied information, excellent bench skills, and we're very proud of the fact that once they can enter the workforce, they can take off in the laboratory. They don't need much training. Some evidence of our student success. Many of our students have received the American Chemical Society's Chemical Technology Student Recognition Award. We also send them on co-ops. They are required a cooperative experience after their 2nd year. And some of the places we've sent them are Kodak, Tufts University, Stanford, FDA, NOAA, including Dow Corning, many of the companies that you may have heard of, Novartis as well. We have some of the highest supervisory satisfactory ratings when they come back for the Institute, RAT overall. And several of our students, like I mentioned, the one have presented at local and national symposia. So just to give you a little bit of our makeup in terms of the student body we have in the LST program. Of the LST students who graduate and pursue their BS degrees in that +2 program I mentioned, 75% are female. We have consistently a large population of females in the LST program. We're very proud of that. 59% of them continue on to get the BS, while about 41% go into industry directly. So over the past, let me see, it's been 11 years now since the LST program has been implemented. 68% of all those students have been female. And of the graduates from LST, about 67% have continued on to finish their degree. So modern day success stories, I'm basing this on past students of the LST program. One of them is Lori Poole. She was one of the students that decided to get her AAS and go right into the workforce. And she was very successful since she went to the MEO, which is the Medical Examiner Office in our local county, Monroe. And her boss, Dr. Bino, says she's never had an intern from any college as qualified as Lori due to the work that she did in the lab. But she was so successful, we actually brought her back into our program, and she's now a lab technician to teach our future students and current. Another student we're very proud of, Nelsie Carcamo. She's a student that decided to go and obtain her bachelor's degree. She received her AS and LST and continued to her bachelor's degree and is now in graduate school for environmental health and safety management. She did research on lung cancer during her time with us, and she actually won the best poster presentation out of 90 posters at our undergraduate research symposium. She was the first to do that, and she was very proud of her accomplishment. Lastly, but certainly not least, Melody Frank. She also received her AAS, continued on to get her bachelor's in biochemistry very recently, last spring, and is now applying to PhD programs. So she may be our first to enter a doctorate program. We're hoping for the best for her, and we know she will. She received actually one of the most prestigious awards for a student at RIT, which is called the RIT Outstanding Undergraduate Scholar Award, and it's given to those students with a GPA of 3.85 or above. Very competitive. And just to give you a little bit of my own experience, being a deaf scientist myself, I did go to RIT as an undergrad, and I had co-ops at Kresge Hearing Research Institute, Stanford, and IBM. And while I was there, they were all very willing to provide accommodations. I didn't need to advocate for myself much at all. And the co-workers were very easy to work with and patient. But this is the advantage to going into a program that is familiar with deaf students. Professionally, after I graduated, I did start out at IBM, and I would have to go through a system where I had to request accommodations, and they would provide them when I requested them. The only issue, the biggest issue, was probably any last-minute meetings. That's very hard to find an interpreter on the spot to accommodate, or a cart service to accommodate you right on the spot. They did send me for training to a professional development conference, and I had requested through them, it was a nonprofit group, CART Services for the educational materials, and they wrote back asking, what are some other alternatives to the accommodation you requested, in terms of asking actually for my hearing loss, to assess what might be best for me. And of course that wasn't appropriate in my opinion, but fortunately IBM was stood up and discussed with them options and found out it was a cost issue because they are nonprofit. So they chipped in and helped provide the accommodation. They paid towards that accommodation to help them out. So it worked out in the end. But that's just an example of some of the walls we hit into outside of those nice comforting zones where they provide the accommodations automatically. And now, as a teacher at NTID, I obviously have no problems. So I want to thank Dr. Harry Lang. He's the one that's done the extensive research into deaf scientists of the past and the accommodations he was able to find out. He wrote 2 publications. If you're interested, I've listed on the slide. But I want to thank him for his